When creating deform rigs with the Rhiggit bodybuilder, one of the options that we have is to create muscles. Muscle parts are simple stretchy bone structures that come in a couple of different varieties. First of all, you can select a muscle name, which makes no difference to the type of muscle that's added, it's just a naming convention for convenience. And like all the other parts, you can choose to add either a single muscle or a pair. And singles and pairs behave in the normal way of everything else. How the muscles differ is by the number of pieces that they are made of. And to this extent, there are three types of muscle that you can have: a one-piece, a two-piece, or a many-piece. They can be added to bridge any point on the deform rig, and the way that you add them is simply this. You select the two joints themselves, not the markers nor the controllers, but the actual skeletal joints, or bones of course if you're using Z bones. And these don't have to be two joints right in line one after the other like this. You could for instance select the shoulder point joint here and the wrist point joint there if you wanted a muscle strung right across between them. So you can string a muscle from any point in the deform rig to any other point. The only rule is that you must have two joints only selected, the from and to points. So here we have just this basic arm set up, and as you can see there's no particular care taken to the deformation at this time. There's no kind of part weighting for upper arm or forearm, and we haven't used any of Lightwave's standard compensation methods either at this point. It is as raw and basic as you can get. So we'll start out here by selecting the shoulder and the elbow, and we'll add first a single piece muscle. Let's have this as a bicep, and we'll just of course add the one, since we are on a single arm here. And you can see that what you get, I'll pull it out here, is just a single stretchy bone component there. You have the top part, position and orient it into place, so this would perhaps go somewhere here, and you have the end point which comes out to wherever it does. We rig that and we see that we now have this muscle part operating there, and it simply provides a stretchy effect along that area of the mesh. You can see of course the collapse that this produces as this end part orbits around with the joint that it's attached to. You can of course manipulate them like this to get manual control over the shaping. Often what you'll find that you need to do with muscles, at least in terms of the end point, is to put them often in line with the bone as if they were actually attached like a real muscle, which generally gives them a better orbit. You'll often also find that since your main deformations will still be coming from the main part of the rig, it's often advantageous to reduce the strength. I frequently go for a 10% muscle, which as you can see has a reduced but still present effect there. And of course quite different than if no muscle were present whatsoever. You can also use tricks like the muscle bulge on the actual muscle bone itself to get extra deformation like that. When this is combined with things like the joint compensation options, in this case on the forearm bone, you can see that the overall effect is much more pleasing. And you can quite easily and quickly build nice simple deformers like this that give great shape control. So that was the one piece. Let's see the two piece, which is very similar though slightly different. You can see that what we have here is pretty much the same sort of setup there. We'll just move that roughly into position like this. But you see we also have this midpoint which we can position where we want. So if the muscle needs to hold more of a shape perhaps, then you can position it thusly. In this case what you now have are two bones or two joints, each scaling toward one another. This is more obvious if we actually use them in Z bones mode. We can see there how they are in fact two bones pointing at one another, and of course both are stretchy like this. This gives us a little bulge controller that we can then animate for stretching around the muscle like this, or stretching the skin around. And we can see how it flexes to center the midpoint as we are animating the main joints themselves. The last type of muscle then is that has 3 or more pieces to it. In this case, let's create, say, a 5-piece muscle. Once again, for the markers, we have this same kind of setup, a top, bottom and mid marker point, which we can fit something like this. However, this time you can see that the bones of the muscle are operating on a spline. So we have this spline type of muscle. Again, this functions somewhat similar to the 2-piece muscle, except that we have this spline action rather than a stretchy action. This creates something that is more like a bulge of a moving mass beneath the skin, and where again the midpoint animates itself across as we rotate the position between the joints, while still giving us the ability to manipulate it directly like this. You can always go further with muscles, of course, by extending them using Lightwave's other tools. For instance, here I have used the effector displacement on the mesh and added these null objects, which are the effectors and which are indeed parented directly to the muscle bones. As a result of this, when the muscle itself stretches and squashes, the effector null is carried with it, giving us this bulgy, shifting, skin sliding muscle that we can see in effect over here. This can give you some very realistic deformations set up with relative amounts of ease. Notice that on these effector nulls here I've also included some nodal motion, which gives them additional animation on top of what's actually coming from the bone parent, but you can operate them with or without that, or of course have them animated some other way. And there are also other ways of using muscles, or perhaps abusing muscles, such as for this cartoon character, where I've used the spline muscle type, and I have essentially set the start and end points directly on top of the actual joint positions themselves, so it's right there. However, I have now used these muscle bones purely to deform the arm. The actual main arm deformer bones, whilst present, have been set to strength 0. The effect is that I can now use this muscle piece as his arm deformer, allowing me to have this bendy, flexy, cartoon style arm, which of course links in with the rest of the deform rig and the associated controllers, allowing us to create these kind of stretchy, squashy effects.